So welcome everybody and good evening. We had a kind of a different kind of arrangement. We had our guests, both guests eating at having dinner with everyone, which is something new. But welcome to Book Breaks, which they are organized by the Library Committee. And I'm Suvendrini Kakuchi. I will be your moderator today. And of course, I don't know how I could introduce such a wonderful author and poet, but it's a great honor to have her. And on my far left is her translator and an author himself, Jeffrey Angles.
Thank you, Drini.
So Miss Hiromi Ito will be talking about her book, The Thorn Puller, which is, for me, I mean, I've just finished it, and it was, for me, like a roller coaster kind of experience, because it takes up such deep topics of spiritualism and international marriage, the whole thing about language. And so I'm not going to go into it because I'm not a literary critic, so I'll leave the floor to her. But the evening will be that she will, Miss Hiromi will speak to us about her book, her writing, her poetry, which is really kind of radicalized Japanese literature. And then we will have Jeffrey talk a bit about his work. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for introducing us, and thank you so much for having us. And
yes, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here.
じゃあ始めますね。First of all, I was thinking about which language I should use, and then I was asking people, English or Japanese, and maybe, not so many chance in Japan listening my broken English, so maybe I will use English. And then I was living in California for 20 more years, and until 2018. And this is 2-3 years before that, my husband, actually we never married. And we are just living together. And then, the international relationship and living together is very difficult. And then, I got my permanent living, how do you say, green card?
Green card?
Yeah, by myself. And he was a British guy, so he got his green card himself, and it's so mess. Anyway, then we had one kid, and I brought 2 kids. And then now, I'm now very aware about the Hague Treaty. Bringing kids from, the place they're born and they grew up, and then I did it. So I took 2 kids to the United States, and then their father was in Japan. Anyway, so I lived there. And then at that time, I didn't know that people are getting old and dying, and they die. Anyway, eventually, I didn't know that, and I heard it, and I knew that, my brain knew that, but I didn't know that, and nobody told me, your parents are getting old, and then they're going to die. So after I left Japan, I'm an only child and living in California, and then 置いといて I want to talk about my husband. My husband was, I said husband, because in Japanese writing, 夫 is just one word, okay, one letter. And if I said partner, and I have to use up 5 words. So, I always use husband, but we never married in a kind of way. But anyway, he was almost 30 years older than me, and then dying. Later on, he was dying. And then, British guy, and then a rather famous artist. So it kind of, I never seen that kind of guy, how do you call it? His head was huge, and physically. But then full of kind of Western idea, Western thought, Western beliefs, Western ego, and everything. And he spoke English much better than I did, or I do. So when we had a quarrel, always English, and then kind of, he was attacking me by English and that kind of experience. And then, we had dinner now, and then I was really worrying about the people having a good time, because in America, we are invited by people, and we invited people, and we are having a dinner party, which we don't do that in Japan. And then in dinner party, people are talking. And then first 10 years, I couldn't join it. Because, even if I could make a quarrel against my husband, but then I couldn't follow the dinner conversation. And then, people expect me to cook, Japanese food and cook Japanese food. Tempura, right? You have to make a tempura and you have to serve right away. But people are telling me, don't be in the kitchen. Come and join us. And the people are kind of thinking, they're thinking about the feminism. Don't be so traditional Japanese women. But you guys asked me to make tempura. Tempura is kind of doing this, so what do you expect me? And also, I couldn't join the dinner table conversation. People are talking so fast about the stuff I don't know. So it was very lonely, interesting 10 years for me. And then about 10 years, I started to get kind of, join the conversation. I could listen whatever they're talking. And then I understand. No, it's a past tense. I understood. People are not talking so interesting things. But so far, it was so difficult. Anyway, and then while I was having that kind of situation, and then my daughters I brought two of them. It was puberty and having a hard time there, and really hard time. And my second one didn't speak for 3 years. If somebody you hear, the parent of somebody, you can imagine that your daughter can't speak 3 years. And she was a very bright kid in Japan and very kind of active. And then when I took her to the United States, she stopped talking. And in the family, she talked. But then outside of no. And then 2 years older, her sister was Kanoko. Her name is Kanoko, and a really famous Kanoko, because I killed her. My first book, Jeffrey translated, Killing Kanoko. It's my daughter's name, but she's still alive, okay? She's 40, and she has 2 kids. And then, so Kanoko, the oldest daughter, she was angry for everything. So everything to American culture or to Japanese culture, to parents. At that time, I was the only parent, and my partner, my husband, is useless. So her anger didn't face, towards him. So to me, so anger for everything. And then, so I had to deal with that, and it's all my fault. In the meantime, I was struggling against that. My parents, okay, I listed that story I buried here, okay? My parents were getting old and dying. And then that time, it was so interesting, so interesting. I've been always interested in death as a poet, and death is something I have to write. But then I never known any dead bodies, never seen. Nobody died around me, only my grandparents. They died, okay, they died. But then I was a kind of, just a ordinary granddaughter. So, oh yeah, they died, okay, that's it. So my family was not interested in Buddhism so much. So, of course we had a funeral, but then that's it. Something like that. And then when my parents are dying, it was so interesting, I said, but then more attractive for me. The death was a big black hole opened up in front of me, and as a poet, I have to see it. And then just same time, I came back to Japan. the reason was Japanese language, because I had a daughter between my husband, and me. And she grew up in the US, and she didn't speak Japanese so well. And so I thought, okay, so one semester I put her in Japanese school. Maybe her Japanese will settle down in her. And actually it happened. But then, so I was planning to come back to Japan, and then she started to go to school. And in the meantime, it's exactly the same time, my mother got some, I don't know what happened, but she started to have a paralyzed her both hand and then both legs. Then she was cooped up in the hospital, and that's it. She lived 5 years after that. My father started to live on his own. And I'm always, father's daughter. So I've been kind of dealing with my father. So that was my different story, but then it was so interesting. So at that time, I started to write this to ge nuki, Thorn Puller. And then, so my life was so difficult that time, and then my British Jewish artist, egoistic, self-centered, male chauvinistic husband was very difficult. He didn't have the kind of notion that the good Japanese girl has to look after the dying parents. He didn't have that. So I have that, but he didn't have that. He thinks that our family is the most important things, and then your family, my parents and I, is a kind of secondary stuff. Okay, that's your idea, but then my idea is different. But then my parents, they knew that I left Japan, I went to California, and then they knew that, okay, Hiromi is not coming back for us. We are here on our own, very isolated, and we are dying on our own. It's so sad. It's really awful things for the Japanese old people. And I'm between them. I understand his idea. I understand my parents' idea. So, and then my daughters, 3 of them, it's kind of more mishmash, okay? And then I'm a poet. I think you know that already. Yes. Poet means you have to write from you this kind of stuff, okay? We are now writing this kind of stuff. It's called the prose. And then I had been always interested in breaking the rules. Somehow breaking rules is my purpose of my life. Breaking the rules in the school, of course. Breaking the rules as a girl. Breaking rules my parents made to me. Breaking rules. And as a poet, breaking rules is my purpose of my being as a poet. And then it means just writing this kind of poetry is not enough. So I want to go beyond. And then I want to talk about art in the medieval Japan around the 17th century. It's called the Sekkyo Bushi. But then I need another 30 minutes, so I skip it, okay? If you are interested in, just check it in Wikipedia, yeah. Okay? Sekkyo Bushi. It's roughly speaking between no play, okay? Bunraku play, between that kind of art. And then much more low class art. And then the main character is always women. Actually, main character is men. Good looking, handsome, very strong prince. These are the men, the men and then the main character. But always women are supporting almost, but then kind of switched into women. And all the kind of the narration is almost done by women. So women in these stories, in so many stories, are all really hard workers. And then they believe that the man is very strong and beautiful and then handsome and good man for me. They believe that, like me. I believe that. And then hard work, and so I've been interested in that Sekyobushi for long time. And then this is my another book, Kawara Alexa. This is a long poem. And then Jeffrey translated The Wild Grass on the Riverbank. This is another, this is translation. And this is actually, this surface of the book is done by my husband. The one that I've been telling really badly, okay? I loved his art, but anyway. So this is also based on Sekyobushi. And another book is also based on Sekyobushi. I have been kind of struggling how to make Sekyobushi like contemporary poetry. And then when I started to do this, I was asked a Japanese literature magazine, which called Gunzo, which is novel magazine, not a poetry magazine. And then, could you write? And then, yeah, of course. And then, you can write anything. You're a poet. You can write anything, they said. They always said that. But then they always said, no. Stories, novels has a time passing, or people has to be standing, or character has to be character. They are always telling us, telling me, and then kind of, how do you call it? Take out my freedom. That's what I felt, the novel people. So I hate them. But anyway, so as a poet, I started to have a series of writing in Gunzo, which is novel magazine. I thought, oh, this is a time for me to make real Sekyobushi in contemporary literature, but then based on my poetry. So that's what I started to write. And as I said, main character is always women who works hard and then used to be a princess, beautiful and didn't do anything, just thinking about the good stuff and loved by people, pretty, beautiful, everything. But then somehow her partner getting into like a zombie or a sick or many kind of bad things happened on him. So he is now here, useless. So the women has to take him to bring him to some onsen. You know that the Japanese loves onsen, okay? So this is also onsen stuff. So put in the onsen, put him in onsen and then cure. That's the kind of main story. So and also Sekyobushi is actually the Buddhist stories. So always relates to some belief of some temple or something like that. So when I made this story as a literature, you know, I look like I'm very kind of natural. So when I'm writing about my stuff, I'm really open, and I can write everything, even if my sex, my stuff, my dirty things, everything, very naturally. That's how Hiromi likes, writes her literature, but it's not true. I'm a poet, I'm a kind of writer, and I'm kind of constructing my head to make my own literature. So when I made it to make Sekyobushi in a modern contemporary poetry, so what I need first, protagonist, women. Okay, me. I'm the one who has lots of difficulties in my life. And now I'm having lots of difficulties right now. So maybe me. So it looks like a shishosetsu in Japanese literature. And then, but then, no, this is not a shishosetsu. I'm much more kind of having some distance. My words and me. That's the big differences. And then, okay, one, protagonist, me. And second, so what is the beliefs of the Buddhism? So then I thought, okay, Sugamo, to ge nuki. I grew up that area, so I knew that area. So my parents, actually not parents, my mother, my grandmother, took me to Sugamo very often. And so I've been watching Sugamo's kind of, way people walks, people buying things, just kind of there. So, okay, Sugamo. And then third one, how you telling the story? So I actually get some kind of voice from Konjaku Monogatari or Ryojin Hisho or of course Sekyobushi itself or that kind of Japanese classics. And then, what else? That's it? Maybe. That's how I started to write. And then, when I started to write, and then, this is monthly, kind of contract. So I have to write monthly. And then every month something happened. And the something happened, mostly hard things for me. It was so difficult. I don't know how to survive this situation. But then I'm always thinking, okay, Hiromi, I got to write. So I'm always watching what's going on. So how can I write? And that's how I've been always thinking. So more important things at that time for me, it was writing than dealing with my parents, dealing with my kid, which is next things. So that's how I survived. Okay.
And we're glad that you survived. We're happy you survived.
I knew I survived.
Yeah, well, the book is semi-biographical, so the book is about your life, right?
Mostly,
Thorn Puller, yes.
But this is based on the true story. Everything is not the true.
Yeah.
Okay, so the good part is mostly my fiction.
Yeah.
If
if I could say a few things about this book. I got to know Hiromi many years ago when I was a graduate student, and I was reading a lot of Japanese literature, and especially modern poetry in particular. It's my great field of passion. So I was reading lots of poetry, and when I encountered her poetry, it was completely unlike anyone I'd ever heard before. As you can already figure out, Hiromi has a very distinctive, very unique individual voice, and a very, a strong way of looking at things. And when I read her poetry, I was like, oh my God, I've never read anyone who sounds like this in Japanese or in English. What an amazing voice! So I wrote to her, and we got to know each other. And I did the first book of poetry, first book of her work in translation. But this was kind of about the time that she was working on this. It was soon after that I started doing her second book, and it was kind of when I was working on this second book that she was going through all these troubles. And so I visited her in California maybe once every while, and I got to know her husband, and I saw her family, and I heard the stories about all these things were happening. And so when they came out in the form of this book, it just seemed like it was such an important book to have in English. One of the reasons that I really wanted to translate this book is because I think it's not just only a masterpiece of modern Japanese literature, it's also a masterpiece of Asian American literature too.
Thank you.
And really, this book I think talks so much about the difficulties of being an immigrant, trying to deal with two families on either side of the Pacific, all the conflicting cultural expectations that are put upon her, and especially on her as a woman in particular. Those kind of things just struck me as so important that they needed to be heard in English. So it's interesting because all the time when I was working on this book, I constantly was asking Hiromi-san, like, "What? This happened? Tell me about what happened here." And she said, "Oh no, that piece is my fiction. There, that piece is my fiction." So I just wanted to mention that because to make it clear that although the main character of this book is named Hiromi, and she's married to a British
Shiromi.
Yes, okay, Shiromi. Yes, born in Tokyo, in the same part of Tokyo. Everything married to a British prominent artist, and so many things look like her real life. There's actually quite a lot of fictional elements in it. But yeah, that kind of melding of fiction and autobiography struck me as incredibly original.
Yeah, but based on the true story, actually. So something like my husband couldn't elect, means couldn't have a sex. That kind of stuff I wrote based on the true story. So I asked him, don't translate it before he dies. So, the German translation is okay. I didn't ask the German translation.
The German translation came out quite quickly.
First,
Yeah.
No, but only 1 year or something.
Oh, really?
It took
Okay.
long time, 10 more years, and then other people as well. But then no English.
It was really funny to be forbidden to but I started working on it in secret, waiting, knowing that Harold's End would come at some point. But yes, I think that if you would have read this book, you would have been furious.
Furious.
Furious, yeah.
I have to be get divorced. we never married first beginning, but anyway, yeah.
So the book won the Hagiwara Sakutaro Prize,
Mm-hmm.
which is the poetry one.
The poetry
prize.
one, yes. Okay, but for this there's no award yet. What is the award for the book? Your Thorn Puller.
Another one. What's the question?
This also won the Murasaki Shikibu
That's
Prize.
right. Yes, Murasaki.
Yeah, so
Right.
it's
Which is not the poetry prize.
Yeah.
So this is a really interesting situation. It's very rare that one book will win 2 literary prizes in Japan, because typically the judges, if they see that it wins one, then they take it off consideration. But this won two very important literary awards, and in one for poetry and one for prose, which is kind of extraordinary in and of itself.
Which is the style in the book, isn't it? A mix
Yes.
of poetry and fiction. I mean, there's some poetry in the book.
Like when I got Hagiwara Sakutaro Prize, I was not a judge, so I didn't know how they made it. But then I heard a couple of poets are really against that, because they said this is not the poetry. And then some people said, oh, this is poetry, and something like that. And I thought from the first beginning, this is poetry. But then I wrote it into Gunzo, and then of course, I want to get the money, okay? More money. And then if you sell a book as a poetry, you can't get money. Almost at all, not at all. And then if you sell a lot, then you get the money, but then it should be novel. But then right after I finished it, Gunzo, the magazine, made a kind of, how do you say, kind of gohobi for me, kind of talk with Tsushima Yuko. And I really respected her, and she passed away several years ago. And Tsushima Yuko and I are talking in the magazine, and she said very clearly, "This is not a novel." So a novel said, "This is not a novel." Okay, this is not a novel. So making money is kind of gone. So poetry, okay, poetry. Yeah,
right.
but now I don't know. I mean, first of all, this is the first edition. The design. But second one, when I made a kind of paperback style, and they trying to sell it. They don't say anything about this is poetry or something. Oh. Yeah. So this is actually, this already has no word. The first printing, it has poetry.
Really?
And it's gone.
Oh, I see. That's
It's interesting. I think that so this has been translated into English, into German, into Norwegian, and so I think
Chinese?
Has it been?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah.
I'm asking my Chinese translator, "とげ抜きやって, とげ抜きやって." But it's so difficult, I think.
I think that. Do you want to talk a little bit about the translation?
It must
And
be so
what
difficult.
translating Japanese?
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. So this was, I think this is the 10th book that I've translated, and this was one of the most difficult ones, I'd say. It's right up there with Orikuchi Shinobu.
Well, how
in
about
terms of
compared with the
difficulty.
Godzilla?
Oh, much easier than translating
He's
Godzilla.
very famous now, the Godzilla translator.
Yeah. Well, that's a very different kind of book, as you can imagine. Anyway, this was quite incredible because in it there are so many different kinds of styles woven together. Some parts of it are told like mukashibanashi almost, a folktale. Some are told like in kind of classical language. Some are very much reminiscent of sekkyobushi. Sometimes there's honorific language, lots of keigo. Sometimes there's very direct colloquial language. So there's so much kind of playing with language in this book to a degree that I've rarely seen in
quotation.
And so many quotations. And almost on every page, there's a quotation from somebody. It's really interesting. At the end of each chapter, she'll say, I borrowed the voices of so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so in this chapter. But she never kind of quotes those people specifically. She's a very well-read writer who reads a lot and puts a lot into her head as input, but then it all kind of comes out in her voice. Do you know what I mean? So so there's a lot of moments in here where like the poet Nakahara Chuya is kind of talking through her, or she's borrowing the language of Nakahara Chuya to talk. Or something like that, using one person or another to kind of help express her own ideas. And so all of this kind of led to the very kind of polyvocal, complex style that was in the original. And so it was a challenge, but great fun as well.
Let me just read the part.
Please.
Okay.
Yes.
Nakahara Chuya kara, this is one part, one chapter. And then I went to the Nakahara Chuya festival, that kind of, story. And then I grew up with Nakahara Chuya, the poet, the poetry. So I kind of can recite everything. So I put so many Nakahara Chuya in the chapter, and now he just finished the whole Nakahara Chuya's translation.
Well, so the reason I decided to do it was because she quoted him so much in this book that I'm like, wow, I already have all these poems translated. I might as well keep on going. So,
yeah. So the last how do you say?
The last footnotes.
Yeah. 中原中也から声をたくさんお借りしました。その他、説教節の小栗半眼、古事記、平家物語、馬場淳二、小野由紀子、佐々木幹郎からも声をお借りしました。中原中也の詩は中也の表記と違うところもございますが、私の声で口に出してみた結果です。お気に障りましたらご勘弁ください。
Yeah.
In this, Baba Junji Onoyukiko is my personal friend. So that's what, we are talking, and then in a kind of conversation, this word, okay, I use it, and something like that. And Sasaki Mikiro is, my colleague. He also
poet,
well-known poet, and he said, I met him in a kind of long kind of absence, and he said, "Oh, did you gain weight?" And that word, I put it in here. So that's it.
Good for you. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, the reason I put this kind of footnote every chapter is, I think it's because of the English. Because I lived in California, using English every day, and then, not like Japanese, English is, I started to study seriously, 30, almost the age of 30. I really wanted to go to America to study American Indians poetry, oral tradition. So that's how I started to English. I went to the English conversation school and then started to speak. And then, so means when I say something, I remember, this way of saying, this person said, this kind of context. And I kind of remember the place, how he said that kind of way, or how she described this way. So that's kind of English vocabulary in my head. Every time when I say something, English kind of, that kind of context is coming in. And then I'm too much good at Japanese, and I learned Japanese when I was little, so I don't remember that. But I'm sure Japanese word as well. When I was 3, when I say something, well, Dad says this, something like that. So I try to use it, like Dad used this word, something like, then I repeat it, okay, it works. So that's how I started to learn Japanese. But then I did it in English with very much awareness. So that's why I think.
Shall we?
So will you read something?
Yeah, shall we read
sure,
some
sure.
passage?
じゃあちょっと立って。
立って。
これ読もうかな。
どれ
このごめん家族の家族を幸せを
ちょっと立とう
この子になった。
でなんか私たちいつも2人でやってて、なんかトラベリングユニットって感
そうなんです、そうなんです。
英語で
これ
ジェフリーが英語で読んで私が
Would you like a mic with the hand?
日本語を入れるっていう感じなんですね。So mostly, we are doing it in the U.S. this kind of way. So he read in English, and then all the audience didn't understand Japanese. So sometimes I put some Japanese word, and then people laughed, something like that. But now it's a kind of
Japanese.
mix.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, so it's much more boring way. I read and he read, and that's it. Anyway. 家庭の幸福。
そう。
家庭の幸福はみじんに砕けた。
Our family's happiness was shattered to smithereens.
妻は獰猛で不実で破廉恥で感情もなく夫を信じてもいない愛してすらいない人間ですらない。
My wife is ferocious, faithless, shameless, unfeeling. She doesn't believe in me, her own husband. She doesn't love me. She's a beast.
夫はキーボードを叩きのめしました。
He was beating on the keyboard.
叩きのめしました。
He beat on it and beat on
叩き
it.
のめしました。
He beat on it and beat
叩き
on
の
it.
めして叩きのめして叩きのめし
He beat on it and
て
beat on it.
夫は罵りの言葉を書き
And
連ね
as
ました。
he did, he spelled out his abuse.
そういう時夫の書き言葉はまるでジェイン・オーステンのように格調高くなり、イギリス英語特有の持って回った言節が全開になり、もちろん普段喋ってる時にもそれはちょいちょい出ますから、人には散々嫌がられ、イギリス人の解約をアメリカ人が分かる前と脇を向いてため息をついてきたわけですが、実を申せば日本人にも分かるかといえば全然分からない。
When he's mad, he uses lofty words like Jane Austen and speaks with that special form of circuitous sarcasm unique to the British. Sometimes those things slip out even when he's speaking normally. People often get ticked off at him. He turns away, sighing that Americans just don't get British humor. Honestly, I can't say that we Japanese get it either.
それが莫大な量の書き言葉で襲いかかってまいりまして、英語文化の非識字者として生きている私です。そのメールを読みこなすのに時間がかかりました。
Everything he writes just comes at me like a great big aggressive jumble of words. After all, I live in an English-speaking country, but I'm practically illiterate. It took me hours just to digest his email. He wrote, I supported you. I supported your children. I supported your work. I supported you while you took care of your parents. Let me repeat myself. I supported you. I supported your children. I supported your work. I supported you while you took care of your parents. My freedom came second, and it caused me all sorts of emotional stress and loneliness. This peach is buried in my thigh, and it still hurts.
まだ桃が痛むと夫は書きました。まだ桃が痛む。私は理解する。あなたをと私は書きました。
I wrote back, I understand.
しかしあなたはあまりにアグレッシブであまりにネガティブ、そしてそれは不可能。あなたが 100% 正しくて私が 100% 正しくないということ。日本のことわざに言う、追い詰められたネズミが猫を噛む、あれはこれではないのか。それに夫婦間の争いに今までかかった金のことは言うべきではない。
I wrote back, I understand. But you're so aggressive, so negative. You make everything so impossible. You're always 100% right, and I'm 100% wrong. There's a Japanese proverb, the cornered mouse bites the cat. And that's what happened. And let me tell you, it's not fair to bring up money during a domestic dispute.
よく読め。ちゃんと読め。俺は金のことを言っているのではないと夫は書きました。
Read this, and read this carefully. I'm not talking about money, he responded.
そんな時夫の桃の傷は今しがた受けたばかりの傷のように痛み始めるのでした。
I could tell the injury to my husband's leg smarted as much now as the moment I inflicted it. I supported you. I supported your children. I supported your work. I supported you while you took care of your parents. Let me say it again. I supported you. He kept beating angrily on the keyboard. You talk about compromises, but a compromise involves both parties giving something up. What are you giving up? What do you intend to give up? Do you intend to give anything up at all? You say I'm being negative. Negative? In my work, I've accomplished things that no one has ever done before, so do you think that's negative? How can you say that? You feel guilty about leaving the house. You feel guilty about your work. You feel guilty when you leave me for so long. Everything makes you feel guilty. I'm sick and tired of you feeling so goddamn guilty about everything.
最後の方は全部大文字で文字通り絶叫しておりました。
The last part was all in capital letters. He was screaming at me
そ
through
の
the
絶叫を
internet.
聞き取りながら私は考えました。夫の怒りが爆発しておる。
He'd blown his lid, but I did think about what he had said.
しかし夫の私感はかなり的を外れている。
But his view of me was way off base.
今まで何を見てきたのか、家を開けることで引け目なんか感じるものか、仕事をすることに引け目なんか感じてたまるか、これは全く私ではないのではないか。
Is that how he really saw me? Do I really feel guilty about leaving home? Do I feel guilty about doing my work? Heavens no, not me.
その時思い出した。
And that's when I remembered why we'd started fighting.
なぜ夫と私が喧嘩したか、その原因。夕食はお鍋でした。
The reason behind it all. We were having onabe for dinner.
新規購入の卓上電気鍋は快適でした。だからその頃毎日お鍋でした。つまり毎日白菜を食べていました。白菜どこでも売ってます。ナッパキャベジないしはナッパと言いくるめられて店頭に積んであるナッパとなワインじゃあるまいし、なんか違うと思いながら毎日買い求めお鍋に放り込みながら、その日その時夫に白菜と言ったら通じなかったのです。それでナッパキャベジと言い換えた。えのきマッシュルーム、シータキマッシュルーム、ビーンヌードル、ソース、次々に言い換えているうちに私は突然絶望にまみれました。今まで10年間暮らしてきてこうか。今まで10年間一緒に暮らしてきて白菜の一つも覚えられるのか。何が I love Japanese food だ。何が I love 鍋だ。その上あんたはこの頃アトキンスダイエットでライスをちっとも食べない。ライス食べなくて妻の文化の何を理解しているというのか。
We were having onabe for dinner. For those of you unfamiliar with Japanese cooking, onabe is a hot pot full of vegetables and meat cooked in broth. Usually it's made over a portable burner on the table so everyone can sit around, cook, and eat together. I'd recently bought a brand new electric burner, and we've been having
白菜
every night. Since it's one of the most common ingredients. In America,
白菜
is called Napa cabbage, or simply
ナッパ
And in California, there are piles of it in every grocery store. Napa makes you think of Napa wine, so it didn't sound right to me. One evening, as I was adding some to the...
お鍋
I used the word...
お鍋 白菜
instead of the English word. My husband didn't understand, so I had to explain. That evening, I'd already had to say...
えのきマッシュルーム
instead of just enoki,
しいたけマッシュルーム
instead of just shiitake,
ビーンヌードル
instead of harusame. I'd had to use the absurdly general word
ソース
to mean something specific like citrus-flavored ponzu. I always have to rephrase myself for him. So by the time we got to the
白菜
I was already in despair. We've been living together for 10 years, and during all that time, he couldn't even learn a simple Japanese word like
白菜
He was always saying, I love Japanese food, I love onabe, but could he prove it? To make matters worse, he was on the Atkins diet. That meant he was eating lots of high-fat, high-protein, low-carb food. He wouldn't touch rice with a 10-foot pole. How could he possibly claim to understand his wife's culture if he didn't eat rice?
罵ったら罵り返された。なんで離婚したと将来愛子に聞かれたら何としましょう。白菜でとどんな顔をして言うことができる。
I shouted at him, and he shouted back. I wondered what would happen if somewhere down the line, Aiko asked us why we got divorced. Because of Napa cabbage? How could I possibly say that with a straight face?
Thank you. 最初とは最後。
最初の方がいいかな。
これちょっと歌えるわよ。
そうか。
こっち行こうか。and one chapter is about an old poet who lived in Kumamoto city. I did never said. Yeah, Kumamoto. I wrote it, and then modeled on Ishimura Michiko. So, and then we were kind of discussing about the Ryojin Hisho. So I quoted a lot of Ryojin Hisho songs.
That was quite a challenge because there is no complete translation of that text into English. So she made me work out.
暁静かに寝覚めして思えば涙ぞ抑えあえぬ儚くこの世を過ぐしてはいつかは浄土へ参るべきと詩人は読み上げました。
Walking in the quiet at dawn, I wonder, my tears welling, having lived in this world of dreams, will I ever reach the Pure Land?
いつかは浄土へ参るべきと言いますから、なんていうか涙にもなんとなく救いがあるんですよねと詩人が言いました。私は納得しかねて申しました。いつかは浄土へ参るだろうという意味でしょうか。べきだからかなり強いですよ。参るべき、参るのであるというと詩人は言いました。この歌を私はもっと否定的にこんなにいい加減に生きていたんではいつになったって浄土へなんぞ行かれるものではないと、そういう意味で読んでいましたと私は申しました。いや、これはそうじゃないと詩人は言いました。この思いというのは、例えば親が恋しいとか、夫に別れた、生き別れか死に別れか知りませんけど、好きな人に別れた、もう帰ってこないとか、あるいは子供を失ったとか、何かひどい運命に陥っているとか、まあいろいろでしょうけれども、思えば涙ぞ抑えあえぬというのはその無料の思いがあって、暁というのは寒かったりするじゃないですかと詩人は言いました。
The poet commented, "It sounds as if the speaker will think it will happen, as if there's salvation even in the sadness of tears." I wasn't entirely sure I agreed. I asked, "Doesn't that mean that the speaker might reach the Pure Land?" The "will I ever" sounds pretty hopeful, she said. "Will I" implies that it might happen. I told her that I had read the poem more negatively. I thought it meant, I've lived such an irresponsible life up until this point, how could I ever expect to reach the Pure Land? No, that's not right, she said. Imagine, for instance, missing your parents or ex-husband. Maybe the poem is talking about losing someone to death and never seeing them again. I'm not sure, but in any case, it's about being separated from your loved ones who will never return. Maybe you've lost a child. Maybe destiny has dealt you a really bad hand. There are all sorts of possibilities. The line, "I wonder, my tears dwelling," contains all of those feelings. The poem mentions dawn because that's one of the chilliest moments of the day, right? It is. I nodded.
詩人はこのように続けました。寒さと悲しさでね、自分の一生は儚かったと、この先も儚いであろうと。だけれども自分も仏様になるのか、仏様がお迎えに来てくださるのかわからないけれど、この現世の苦労もいつかは終わるんだと。そして終わった先には浄土があるんだと。いつかは浄土へ参るべきと思うことで今ここで救われたわけじゃないけれど、やっぱり救いの道はあるんだと。
The poet continued, "Spent in coldness and sadness, my whole life has been fleeting like a dream. Just as what lies before me, too, soon will be gone. I do not know whether I will become a Buddha or whether a Buddha will come to carry me away. But all the sufferings of the present world will end. And beyond that lies the Pure Land. By thinking, will I ever reach the Pure Land? You may not be saved here and now, but there is a path to salvation, even so."
それで私は申しました。前にお書きになったお経みたいなあの詩、あれを読んだとき、黄昏さん、これが彼女の名前です。黄昏さんがお書きになる世界、そこには死っていうのがやっぱり抗いがたくあるんだけど、死よりももっと生きているものがいっぱいあって、あそこにもここにも生きているものが、ちっちゃいものもいっぱい生きていて、その裏返しに全部死が影のようにくっついていているという、そういう世界がパッと現れてきたんですよね。あれをね、読んでいただきたいの、せっかくですしね、朗読していただきたいんです。どうでしょう。お願いをいたします。まああなたもやりますね。お上手ですねと笑いながら詩人は声に出して読み始めました。
There's a poem that this led me to a request I wanted to make. There's a poem that you wrote in the form of a Buddha Sutra. When I read it, I felt like I got a sense of the world as you see it, that there's this thing called death that's impossible to resist in the end, but there are more living things before us than dead things. There are tons of little living things all over the place, but the shadow of death is always right there hanging over everything. That's what I took from it. Since we're here now, will you do me the favor and read the poem for me? Would that be okay? She laughed. My goodness, I'm sure you could do it just as well. You're so good at reading.
実法無量百千万の句生世類語人人微妙無妙暗中ルールソゲオンリーチリン幕名無名未食かい歌い終わると詩人は照れてふーっと笑いました。その笑い顔が3時間の間そこにいたのは私から何十年何百年も隔たった世界に生きてきた老女であったのです。これまで海でも山でも散々殺生を重ね、血まみれの手で言葉を書き続け、語り続け、そして病を得て、今ここにちょこんと座っていらした。でもその笑顔があんまりあどけなくて、今はこうして一緒の部屋に対面して喋っておりましたこの私ですけれども、昔々の祖母やおばや母に手を引かれてお地蔵様にお参りしたあの頃にずんと戻されてしまいました。戻された私はそこで時空の微塵になりまして、バラバラに散らばってずんと今へ戻ってきました。これまでもこれからでも海でも山でも殺生を重ね、血まみれの手で言葉を書き続け、語り続けてきましたし、語り続けていきますのです。そしていつの日かおいて病を得て、このように一足ずつ橋がかりを渡ってくるようにこちら側へ来て、ちょこんと座り、震える手で辞書にサインをいたします。
The poet, still smiling, started to recite the poem which he had written in classical Chinese. Infinitely extending in 10 directions, hundreds, thousands, millions, billions of generations, extending across incalculable measures of time, so exceedingly deep and subtle, in darkness without any light, the plants and flowers flow on, blossoming far off in the distance, in a world of darkness devoid of light, an ocean of billions of lives not yet born. When she finished, she grew embarrassed and giggled. What an expression. The old woman with whom I'd spent these last 3 hours had inhabited a world separated by decades, perhaps even centuries from mine. She spent so much time trapping animals in the mountains and in the sea, scraping words together with bloodied hands and speaking, before falling infirm and sitting right before me. However, as we sat facing one another in her room, her smiling face was so innocent that I was transported to long ago, when my grandmother, my aunts, my mother led me by the hand to pray to Lord Jizo. Transported, I was transformed into the dust of space and time and scattered to the winds before finally returning to who I am now, here before you. Up to this point, I have trapped animals in both mountains and sea, scraped words together with bloodied hands, and spoken my mind, and I will continue to do so from here on out. One day, I too will grow old and infirm and come here one step at a time, crossing a bridge to reach this side, where I too will sit with pen in trembling hand to sign my work.
どうぞ。じゃあ Yeah, on that beautiful note, I open the floor for questions. Please come up to the microphone and ask your question. Anybody? Yeah.
質問しろっつったってねそこに来いったってねそれは無理ですよね
Nobody?
ここでこう質問待ってる方もすごく恥ずかしいんです
Okay, so
はい
yeah, so I'm going to ask you because you've been described as a strong feminist poet and author, how are you received in the Japanese
this poetry?
Yes, in
No
this
word
very
about
paternal
feminism. No,
well,
nobody is mentioning
paternalistic.
about the feminism. About this book?
Oh, it's just in general.
In general, yeah.
General. Wow.
Well, you've told me that.
Did I?
Well,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
please.
okay.
Yes.
Can I
Yeah,
share
yeah,
something?
please.
So Hiromi has said to me that when she first started writing, she was writing so much about her own body. She was writing about sexuality. She was writing about pregnancy, what it was like to be pregnant and to give birth to a child, how fun that was, what it was like to nurse a child. And men critics, who were the majority of the poets at that time, back in the 1980s, and were not understanding at all. Like they just thought, oh, who is this? And then also she got a lot of pushback from other women poets too. But at the same time, there were other people like Ueno Chizuko, the famous feminist, who kind of immediately recognized that she was a genius, writing about the things that people are, the people that were, well, but I'm quoting Ueno Chizuko, ne?
Thank you.
Yeah, who said, that, she's writing about all these things, the experiences of women that people are just not putting into literature. So I think that's one of the reasons that Hiromi's writing is so incredibly valuable, because she's brought a very fresh viewpoint early on at a time when, now we have so many great women authors in Japanese literature. It seems like all the great women writers all the great writers in Japan now are women. But I think Hiromi was kind of ahead of the curve in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So was it difficult for you?
Why?
Because of the reaction to you.
Oh, the
Yes.
action.
Yeah.
The action was kind of, annoying, actually. The women poets, all the women poets, they really hated me. And then men are easy, actually, to deal with, because the men, they liked, younger. I was young that time, and much skinnier and cute. And the young, cute girl talking about, so bad words, spitting around and writing about her own sex. And then, it was interesting, And then, but then they started to kind of gather, the publisher did, male poets did it. They started to kind of gather all the women poets and then put in a circle, like a ghetto. And they called us as a women poets. And then at that time, just wait a minute, I wanted to be a poet. I don't want it to be a women poet. I'm a woman. I'm very happy to be a woman, but then women poets. But then that was a kind of way to sell the books. As I said already, okay, we need money. So, selling more copies is much, I got. So I accepted that kind of way. And then, So somehow I feel like I also cooperate with these male people, our company, a publisher, I cooperate with. So I can't accuse them only,
Yeah, I
feels
know.
so strange,
I know.
weird. But now, when I said I don't want to be called as a women poets, and then so many, all younger women poets understand when I said they do have the same sort of feeling. So It's a good time, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Japan has changed or trying to
No,
change.
Actually, not really changed.
Yeah,
That's
I
the
know.
problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, please. Yes.
First of all, thank you so much for this amazing opportunity of listening to both of you reading it. I could feel the strength in your writing, but of course, listening live is just amazing. I have many questions, but I would just like to know more about your routine as a writer, but as a reader. Clearly, with the voices that you bring, you read a lot. And I was interested to understand if you have a process of do you need a book next to you when you're writing? You evoked memory. How often do you read? What is your relationship to the books around you? Like, I know in the book you mentioned carrying your books from one country to the other. You have the library. If you could tell us more about what does it mean to be a writer who is a reader, who brings those voices, and maybe a little bit more if you do have a routine, like you have to wake up and read a book, or you write first and then you go back to the book. So anything you'd like to share about that, I'll be happy to hear. And thank you so much once again.
Thank you for a very interesting question. Yeah, I don't read books now. I'm so sorry. I'm kind of getting into only manga.
That's
and
not true.
I was since I was little. I was always and I am manga person. Now I started to buy the manga. How to say how do you call it? Online manga. So I can, and then I'm always having some kind of problem with the sleeping, not insomnia, but then kind of getting sleep is very difficult for me. And then now I have my laptop and I'm holding laptop in my bed and just reading it and something like that. And then, so that's, manga is really good. And then the same manga on and on and on. And then too much time I have to spend reading manga and I can't read books. But so far, I've been reading so many stuff, and then I kind of remember. And also, books are so weird. And even if I don't read, I have. And in my bookshelf, they are kind of inviting me. Hey, I'm here. So when I need something, I need some, it happened actually. Ippen, Japanese Buddhist, in the 13th, 14th century, I really want to quote Ippen's word here. And then where's Ippen? And I couldn't find it. And then several days later, suddenly, somebody's calling me from the bookshelf. And then I kind of dig out, and then there's Ippen here. So I bought it, but I never read it. So then they opened, this is the word I wanted to know. And then how I knew, I don't know. Long time ago I read something, something like that. Strange. But then once I read it, and then kind of somewhere in your mind, kind of connect to the under consciousness and kind of deeply there. And I was talking with him before. I was living in Poland for 2 years when I was very young. At that time, I couldn't have anything to read. So, and at that time, still kind of under the social, how to say? So, 社会主義の国.
It was socialist country.
Yeah. So, it was very difficult, no food, nothing. And then no Japanese books. At that time, I was kind of reading ramen. I got the ramen, everything Japanese I read. So something like that. When I had a medicine and everything I read, something like that. Almost like I'm, how do you call it? If you are fish, you are living in the air, you need the water. How deeply you need the water, with something like that. So for me, Japanese is like that. And then when I was in Poland, I went to I very often went to the Warsaw University, the Japanologist, department. They had a kind of, Japanese classical, Nihon Koten Bungaku Taikei. And nobody was reading it. The student couldn't read it. So I was the one who kind of, and then read so many Japanese classics. that was, at that time, I was thirsty, and it was water, and kind of getting it. The same thing happened when I was in the U.S., and then also at that time I was 40, so I knew already so many things. And then every time I came back, I already ordered all the books, and then I put my luggage, and then I had 2 kids having a rucksack, and I put all the books, and they were kind of carrying it, almost like a smuggling, the book merchant, something like that. So in my Californian study, and also we had a book. So some second-hand bookstore, book something.
Book off.
Yeah,
book off.
And
yeah.
then
I
went to book off in San Diego, and then I love Iwanami Bunko. So, or sometimes, like, so you classical, and I don't really like that modern stuff, because when I was living in California, more and more I loved classics. Not only Japanese one, but any kind of classics. And the newer one is too much kind of ego, people's ego. And I'm here in California. I'm almost like abandoned by Japanese culture. I'm like a hermit. I don't want to face the people's ego. So I couldn't read like a 19th century or 20th century's people's writing. So classicals. And then the book off, I went there, and it's $1 sale. The $1 and the Hanya Shingyo, so many books, and I bought everything. And sometimes I kind of see the drawer, which is, they are not selling, just I keep it, storage. And I took so many things, I took it. So almost, I bought everything from book off. I'm not talking about book off, but then how to read books, So my study has so many books I don't read, but I bought. And I collected. And these are mostly old stuff. And that comes, I don't know why, but then I had the same sort of story from some other hermits who are living outside of kind of, how to say, these people who are kind of escaping from their main country.
Yeah.
Nomads.
Huh?
Nomads.
Expats?
Expat.
Expatriates?
Some other kind of biblical word. But anyway, yeah, that's how. Yeah.
Okay, so you missed that.
It's interesting, at one point when Aozora Bunko came along, suddenly Hiromi started telling me, she started telling me, have you read this? Have you read that? Have you read this? Have you read that? And one of her great loves is the writer Mori Ogai. And she has this long kind of love infatuation going on with Mori Ogai
Could
for
you
many
explain
years.
what Aozora Bunko, maybe some people don't, who, Aozora Bunko, do you know?
Yeah, it's basically.
Some people don't know.
It's So if people don't know, it's
free.
Free site where books that are in public domain are uploaded. So you can read all kinds of things that are for which the copyright has expired, free of charge. So
Mori
many
Ogai,
classics.
she mentioned about Mori Ogai, which
So many.
is amazing, because Aozora Bunko, and go to the Aozora Bunko, you can get most of the Mori Ogai stuff. Dazayo-san too, and then these kind of texts, I kind of copy it into my words, and the computer and the words I can't read, this way. I have to read that way. I'm all Japanese, so tategaki only. So I put it in my word, and then lots of like a Ruby. How do you call it? Ruby.
Furigana. We don't have
Furigana
it
there. Okay. Furigana, so the kanji, and it has a how to read, furigana. And then, sometimes, too difficult, too mage-ish kanji he used. So I changed everything into my way. So that's how I read Mori Ogai. So many times by hand. I call this is hand reading, not sight reading. And then it means his word, his rhythms kind of came into me. So and the Dazayo-sama is very good also, very rhythmical and very kind of poetic. And then Soseki is boring. for me. And then, so mostly Dazai and Ogai, and Akutaga Ryunosuke is also very kind of nice, nicely rhythmical. But then Ogai, more Ogai, and something like that.
Right. Why Ogai? What is that?
Oh, because the rhythms of the style, it's wonderful. And then, Ogai, and then Soseki, and then maybe I could say Rohan. Which Rohan?
Koda?
Koda Rohan. And these three are really kind of big stuff, And I love Koda Rohan, by the way. But anyway, so these people are born in a very late Edo era and grew up in the Meiji era, and they studied foreign language. And then the native language, the Japanese language, and dialect and so on. And they made a literature. But Koda Rohan was Chinese literature. Not the Western literature, not the Western language. But then, how they wrote, then totally different. Ogai is almost like you see the big, how do you call it, like a layer of the soil. Some of the cliff, you can see the layers, the layers like that. And then, this is his native language in Tsuwano, and maybe this is the speaking Edo dialect he learned when he was 7 or 8 or something like that. And then writing language in the Edo era, and then Japanese classics, and then the big thick layer of the Western language, mostly German, but then English as well, French and so on. So that kind of layer of the language, and his writing is really comes into that. So when you are reading it, you have so rhythmical rhythms, but where the rhythm came from. So I was thinking, I was living in California, lots of time I had. So that's why I spent lots of time for playing with this word. I think the Ogai's rhythm came from Chinese poetry. So Gogonzeku, Shichigonzeku. So 7 words, 7 words, 7 words, 7 words, 7 words, 7 words, And then every, how do you say? I can't say that, 日本語で失礼しますね。で、韻を踏んでいるわけですよ。Rhyming, here, 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 here. So almost that kind of way, he translated the Western language into modern Japanese, and he himself didn't know he was rhyming, but he was rhyming something.
No, his language is incredible, so sophisticated. But it makes sense to me that you would be interested in such a writer.
すいません、水ください。
Oh,
I see. That's interesting.
If
Yeah.
we talk
Okay.
about that,
You can.
Ogai, I need more 30 minutes, so let's skip it.
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we can take the last question. Yes, please. Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. これ this is not the COVID or such. I checked it already, so just a cold. Hi, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the difficult point in making some question is that your performance and your speech was very complete and scattered but complete. So, but since you spoke about rhythm, I actually did some translation of Mrs. Ito Hiromi as well, and rhythm is a very difficult part. No, it's very difficult. It's a very exciting part. Not only so. One question is for the translator, and one question is for the author. And to Jeffrey-san, I would like to ask. How do you say? It's a difficult question to pose. How do you manage to translate as long as it concerns the rhythmical parts? For instance, Ito-san enjoy very much it's normal in Japanese to use a lot of repetition, so we don't like repetition as well. So it's difficult to use it to acquire the same type of rhythm. But it's not only that; it's really reading. It's very rhythmical. You can imagine you feel the rhythm as like a drum, and I'm not quite. I couldn't say that I was exactly the same feeling when I read my Italian translation. So anyway, how did you manage with rhythm? And to Hiromi-san, your last full entirely poetry book was Kawarare Kusa, I think. It's maybe 2005. No, you were. No, the question is not poetry. Yes. Are you feeling compelled to? What are you working on? If you are working on something right now, and if you are going back and once again breaking the rules and going back to full poetry, if I may say, that's a question.
What is the question?
日本語その、伊藤さんのこの赤原レクサっていうのはいわゆる典型的な詩の最後の本だったと思いますけれども、2005年でしたよね、確かに。
視聴者という
視聴者ですね。
詩の出しから、詩の出版社から出したのは赤原レクサが最後ですね。
その今は他に何か中から新しいことを書こうとしてるっていう何かのエネルギーまた湧いてくるきてるんじゃないかなっていう。
なんか今私ほとんどプローズが好きなんですよね。
ですよね。
でプローズの中にこう書いていってその自分の詩っていうのが出せるような気がしてきて、で全くこの行明け詩に興味なくなってきてたんです。でも絶対行明け詩書いたら負けのような気がして、でなんかイングリッシュで言ってほしい。
Yeah, you can translate.
Yeah, so when I write, I've been recently writing mostly prose, and that's what I feel like I'm writing poetry. And when I'm writing, prose, poetry style, sometimes I'm asked to get the money, So I accept that, job, and then I write the poetry. It's boring. Not only boring, I'm kind of, losing my fight against me. And I think, I have to, like a poet. I was teaching poetry in Waseda for 3 years. So that's why I'm kind of this kind of way. Poet should be. This is a boundary of Japanese, okay? Japanese. And then the writers, novelists are working here. I'm talking about the language side, okay? And then this is a boundary, so poet has to be the boundary and beyond. Somewhere, like people never expected, never think. So we kind of cross the border and go beyond. Okay, come, Japanese can kind of explore that far. That's something a Japanese poet should do in the Japanese language. So in that kind of things I've been thinking. So just writing poetry, it's kind of losing my fight. So, it's really boring. But then I'm getting kind of interested in writing again these days. Somehow, that was, first of all, I was asked. And then I wrote some. Okay. And then I wrote some more, and more. Okay. And then somehow, when I read somebody's writing, poetry is more easier for me to read. I can read poetry, good or not, I can tell immediately. But then the prose is more difficult. It means I think I'm much better off to deal with poetry, something like that. How do you think?
I can't speak for you, but
but you are writing poetry.
I am, yeah. That's right.
Yeah. He's also a poet, and then he got the prize I never got. And then he wrote the first poem, My Place.
Yeah.
We were doing some renshi together and inviting Jerome Rosenberg from the U.S., and he passed away just for a while ago. And then Jerome Rosenberg and Tanikawa Shuntaro, and Tanikawa-san was a kind of leader, and Yotsumoto Yasuhiro, and I think one more person, Kaku Wakako. And then he was just happened in Kyoto. We didn't have much budget, so I asked Jeffrey, come and do all the translation.
It was so fun.
It was, so
Yeah.
we are kind of both language. And we wrote in Japanese. He immediately translated into English. And then Jerome Rothenberg wrote in English, immediately translate into Japanese, and that kind of way. And Tanikawa-san, Kaku-san, Yotsumo-san, they're really good at doing this. So we are kind of making and making poetry. But then at that time, after we finished everything, he said, oh, maybe I can write a poetry. Okay, go ahead. And I still remember how he was writing it. My house, my table. And できた, Hiromi-san. And no, it's a poetry. It's good. And that's how he started to write.
Yeah.
In Japanese.
In Japanese, right?
In
Yeah.
Japanese, yeah.
No, it's funny. I had written poetry in English before a lot over the years, but then for a long time I was just doing translation. But at that experience, I felt my desire to write poetry come up again, and since I was in Japan, it seemed to make sense.
Which
to
is
write in
more
Japanese.
interesting, translating and writing your own stuff?
Writing my own stuff is more exciting, but at the same time, with translating you get to delve deeply into the mind of somebody else, and I like translating because I always choose to translate writers who I think don't have a voice like mine.
Oh.
I like to translate authors who don't sound like me or who think differently than I do, because that way I get to live inside of your mind, inside of your words for a little while, and I learn. I get to learn that way.
Yeah,
So
your poetry and my poetry are totally different.
completely different.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's been translating my stuff, so I think he could get influenced by me, but no, not at all.
Oh,
So-
that's not true. That's not true. You haven't seen everything I've written.
No.
So that's
Anyway.
something I need to show you.
But I'm so interested in also translating, and then I'm not
Yeah.
translating from English or that kind of modern stuff, but then
Oh.
I've been translating sutra into modern Japanese, which is...
She also is the translator of the American picture book author Dr. Seuss.
Yeah.
She's translated some of his books.
Oh, where?
Yes, Out of the Dust too by
Out
Karen
of the
Hess.
dust, I did, yeah.
Yeah,
And
so-
where the way... What's the title?
Huh?
Dr. Seuss.
The Places We Will Go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was it? Okay.
So
And then so sutra, which is very interesting for me. And then we Japanese, we studied kanbun, Chinese classicals in our school life. So we can read ichigo. So I started to get interested in that, and then almost like I was talking about Sekkyobushi, which is between No and Bunraku, which is almost like between the poetry and the prose. And then also there are songs and chanting and everything put together, that kind of art. And then sutra is exactly that kind of art that really caught me. And then I've been still doing sutra translation into modern Japanese,
So-
which is fun.
Speaking of translations, can I let me just answer your question very briefly in one or two sentences. About the translating the rhythm of Japanese. She's, as you could see, she's a very rhythmical reader, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to hear her, so many times. I think I'm in a very special position with Hiromi as her translator, because I know what she sounds like in English, kind of, and so I can imagine what words she might use and how she might say something. So that's something I think that most translators don't have. They don't have that resource, so that makes it very special. But trying to reproduce the rhythms of this book was very challenging. And when I did, and I took it to the editor didn't always understand too. So the same editor who worked on this book was the same editor who worked on Murakami Haruki's novels. And so you might have heard that Murakami Haruki's editors like to chop up his writing a lot. The editor wanted to do the same thing to this, so I had a fight a lot all the time to say, no, we can't take this out. No, we can't do that. We have to keep the sentences long here because that's how they are in Japanese. There's a purpose to it. There's a rhythm to it. And so that was a challenge.
Okay. Yes. No, that's really... we're just over time. Can you ask? Yeah.
I just like to know about Chunsuke, the sparrow dog.
Hi.
What's the dog breed?
Papillon.
Oh, I see. Not a butterfly.
Yeah.
Okay.
There is a dog in the story, and then I wrote, like a sparrow dog, but then actually that was papillon.
Papillon.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you, Hiromi-san. Thank you, Jeffrey. And the book is here. Is it available? It's available at the reception if you want to purchase it, and I think Hiromi-san will sign.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, that's great. So I'm really sorry to close this up at 8:30, so we've got to vacate the room. But I thank you very much for a wonderful evening, and I hope you come again. This is a token of our gratitude, so you become a one-year member.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, thank you so much.
And Jeffrey,
Thank you so much.
so you've got to come from Kumamoto to visit us here. Because she lives in Kumamoto. So thank you very much for coming, and have a good evening.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.